The NFL ruled that the Philadelphia Eagles did not tamper with running back Saquon Barkley, and even if they did, who cares? Get rid of this rule. NJ.com Eagles beat reporter Chris Franklin joins me on today's show to get takeaways from OTAs.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome into this Thursday edition of the podcast. I'm your host, Louis DiBiase, analyst also over at Bleacher Report. You can find me on X at DiBiase LOE. On today's edition of Locked On Eagles, we're going to get into the Eagles not tampering with Saquon Barkley, and even if they did, this rule in the NFL needs to be removed. Plus, Eagles beat reporter for NJ.com, Chris Franklin, joins me for all the OTAs takeaways that your heart desires. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. So, as I mentioned, the NFL ruled today that the Atlanta Falcons, but not the Philadelphia Eagles, did tamper with Kirk Cousins. The Eagles did not tamper with Saquon Barkley in free agency before the legal tampering window opened that Monday before free agency officially begins on Wednesday. We all know that officially, though, the signings, all the fun, the news happens that Monday when things open up. So the Eagles got away with it, even if they did tamper. The NFL ruled that they did not. The Atlanta Falcons lost a 5th-round pick for tampering with Kirk Cousins, who they brought on to that 4-year, $100+ million contract. Then drafted Michael Penix. No idea what Atlanta's doing. But Philadelphia, great move getting Saquon. They were not penalized for bringing him in. And even if they did tamper, and I think they probably did still, like they found no evidence through text messaging and all of the evidence that they tried to pull up. Of course, the NFL can reopen any investigation if new information does come up down the road, but I can't imagine the Eagles have anything to worry about. Even if they did, what are they going to lose? It's going to be a late day 3 pick. So not too worried about that. They got away with this one though. But again, like I said, even if they did do this, the NFL needs to remove tampering. Like everybody does it. All 32 teams do this. You literally, the funniest part of this rule about not being able to tamper is you literally have a legal tampering day before free agency officially begins. So you don't even say you can't negotiate until free agency starts. You're saying, hey, we're allowing a day or two before free agency begins where you can tamper. So why not just open it up when you know everybody's doing it anyway? You know what I'm saying? It's so stupid. Players are going to sign where they want to regardless. Do they really think that the Atlanta Falcons talking to Kirk Cousins like a week earlier than they legally could was going to sway Kirk Cousins' decision? Like maybe if that didn't happen, he would have went back to Minnesota or signed with another team. Like, do we really think Saquon Barkley wasn't going to come to Philadelphia if he didn't talk to the Eagles at the time he did? Like, I don't know. It's such a stupid rule to me. Like, yes, you should not be allowing a player to negotiate with another team during the season when they're under contract with another team. But the ticky-tack, like, oh, they talked to him 2 days before the legal tampering window opened up. Like, you know, Howie Roseman talked to Saquon's agent. Like, give me a break. You also got to remember, so many of these players have the same representation. So Howie Roseman might be talking to an agent for one of his current players on the Eagles, who also happens to be the agent for a pending free agent. Like, come on, this is the way the NFL business works. We should not be taking away draft picks unless it's like some giant, big tampering conspiracy like it was with the Miami Dolphins a few years ago, if you remember, where they were trying to get both Tom Brady and Sean Payton. Tom Brady was still with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Sean Payton was still under contract with the New Orleans Saints. Like, that's a mastermind, like, tinfoil hat conspiracy thing that the NFL cracked. And then they cracked down on the Dolphins, losing, I think it was a first-round pick, if I'm not mistaken, right? They lost a first-rounder for that. Like, that's a massive, massive tampering move. That I would understand. That's an extreme example, though. And again, if you're trying to, like, if Howie's trying to talk to Saquon when the Giants are in Philadelphia on Christmas Day of 2023 to come sign with the Eagles in free agency, that's a different story. But again, if we're talking about like a week or two before this legal tampering window hits not even the start of free agency. Again, the NFL has opened up a day of tampering for the league. If they did this a little bit before that, they should not be losing draft picks. Luckily, the Eagles are not losing a pick anyway, but I always thought that rule was just really stupid. Anyway, we're going to get into some more important stuff coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Eagles beat reporter for NJ.com, Chris Franklin, joins me to talk about standouts from OTAs, Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni's relationship, what moves could be coming from Howie Roseman now that there's some downtime between OTAs and training camp. I'm sure Howie's going to get a little bit bored on his family vacations. He's always got to be doing something. Maybe he's working the phones, trying to make another trade or sign another player. If so, what position? All that and more coming your way with Chris Franklin of NJ.com joining us next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time makes getting tickets to the NBA, the NFL, the MLB, the NHL, and more faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. The NBA Finals still going on right now, although it's 3-0 in favor of the Boston Celtics. The Florida Panthers are up 2-0 right now in Edmonton in the Stanley Cup Finals. The NFL schedule is out as well. Get your Eagles tickets both at home and on the road through Game Time, where you can save up to 60% buying last-minute tickets for sports, but not just sports, concerts. It's summertime, a lot of concerts coming up. I love stand-up comedy. You can get comedy tickets through Game Time, theater, and more. Take the wife out on a good theater night through Game Time. Plus, you're going to get a panoramic view of your seat before you buy through the app, so you know on top of the great price, you're also getting a great view. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, use that code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Eagles fans, thanks so much for joining us on this Thursday edition of Locked On Eagles, joined by one of our regulars now. He is the beat reporter for the Philadelphia Eagles at NJ.com. It's Chris Franklin. You can find his work on Twitter as well, or I should say X, over at CFranklinNews. Chris, again, thanks for coming on the show with such short notice. And OTA's done. We kind of got the dead zone now of the offseason before training camp, so definitely want to get you on and kind of take a last look at OTAs and a first look at camp.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on for that. Yeah, it's hard to believe that in a few months we're going to be starting up regular season football. So it's crazy.
I know. It's insane. And, Chris, I thought minicamp was very interesting. I don't want to say for the first time in a while, but it was the first time in a bit that it was mandatory, right? I think it was a little more intense, especially with them implementing a brand new offense, pretty much like Jalen Hurts alluded to with Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator, a brand new defense under Vic Fangio. Do you agree with that? I don't want to say it felt a little more intense, but I think there was a lot more eyes on OTAs this year, maybe than normal.
Well, it's almost like getting that new gift in a way that you had new people. So it was kind of cool seeing that. And the fact that we were seeing an actual mandatory minicamp. Right. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And it was cool in the fact that, you start to see some of the wrinkles because we've heard all the time about these coordinators and what they bring here. And you start to see the styles up close. Like you can watch all that stuff. Like you can read every playbook concept, or you can watch the stuff online and try to clean it. But when you see it in person, you hear the instruction, you hear that thing out, it just adds a whole nother level. So it definitely made it a lot of fun to watch that. And it was some pretty interesting things you can glean out of that.
Well, and that's why I want to get you on the show, because you are up close and personal watching practice. Did you notice from the times that you were there any sort of differences with the coaching style or the intensity compared to the past few years under Nick Sirianni, or kind of just, par for the course?
I think in terms of Sirianni, it was a lot of the same stuff. Still saw whether it was a veteran or a rookie, he was harping details and really trying to make sure that they fix a lot of the stuff that they had issues with last year and went along this way. And in terms of coordinators, I thought it was very interesting watching how much motion that Kellen Moore used. And I know everybody talk about motion, motion. Just the way that he uses it in order to get the matchups that he wants, and the timing of that, and how he tries
to hearing that
the zone. So it was very cool to see okay, and you hear the process, why you hear him talk about why they were trying to attack a certain play, why this was going for certain this way, and it's like, okay, you hear that, sounds like, okay, that makes sense there. It makes sense that way. Defensively, it was interesting seeing, especially when it comes to the destruction of those young cornerbacks. and the young defensive backs overall, because they're very loaded at that position right now. They have a lot of bodies that are about to welter out, and the thing is, they have more depth there too. So I was trying to see whether it was Fangio, whether it was the assistants, trying to get the most out of them in terms of that, and letting them play loose, that fine line, and trying to balance. And I think we saw from the way they played and the way they broke up passes and get interceptions, they learned pretty well from that.
Yeah, and Chris, again, you don't want to overreact too much to what you're seeing in June, but was there a player or two that, really stood out to you that you're saying that's kind of a guy I'm circling for training camp for the preseason that could really turn some heads? Maybe not a starter, but a guy trying to make the 53, or maybe somebody that is battling for a starting job.
It's funny because I think when you look at both, it's tough. I'll go with this one too because he was on the roster last year, because Isaiah Rodgers was the one who was originally, but you know what?
Yeah.
You look at, he started out camp and he did well throughout it, like jumping around. But I look at Kelee Ringo, guy who was bigger, when we first heard last year when AJ Brown was saying, like, Kelee Ringo's probably a guy you guys need to be watching. It's like, okay. So then you saw him when he got on the field, he was physical. You can see he had traits there that can be good. He's just struggled sometimes, but you saw the stuff there. Now that he's a year into it, now you see he feels more relaxed, feels more comfortable in the league. He knows what his assignments are to go from here on there. The way he was playing Brown, the way he's playing some of his receivers, he did very well. To the point now I'm looking at, I know you got Quinyon Mitchell, I know you got Cooper DeJean.
Yeah.
How do you find ways to get him on the field, whether it's dime package and you're running quarter, you ain't gonna see that much because unless you're running late in the game, but at least in a dime package, because I'm looking at that, whether it's that or nickel, how do you get him on the field? Because he was just making a lot of plays. So that's the guy that I'm really looking at, especially we all know what's going on with James Bradbury's situation and everything else. That's a player who could stand to see a lot more time if they decide to move on in a different direction.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question, actually, for you, Chris, is because Kelee Ringo looks so good, and you were going to lead with Isaiah Rodgers, who I felt like every single practice people were talking about as a guy that was turning heads. But are these two, and you could even throw Eli Ricks into this equation, maybe even Cooper DeJean, James Bradbury, do these guys have a shot at a job in 2024 on the outside because they do have Quinyon Mitchell and Darius Slay? Are these guys battling for a job this year, or is it more who's going to be the heir apparent to Darius Slay and to be that, counterpart to Quinyon long term? Like, are they battling for 2024, or is it more 2025?
I think it's for the long term. I think right now it's going to be tough for no matter what. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to trade one of these guys.
Do you think there's any way Quinyon's not starting this year?
I think there's a chance there could be.
Okay.
I think it's still, because it still looks to me like I look at the way that I'm still not 100% sold that Bradbury is going to be traded.
Okay.
So because especially everybody knows that he's going to a situation could be released. Yeah, it's possible, but I still look at him. I still think I'm in the minority. I still think he could be a contributor here, whether it is a safety or in the middle of the field, what have you. But I can still see that way too. And I look at Quinyon. I think you can develop him in a slow way. I know it's about Ringo as being potentially a dime. Maybe you put him in there, let him get his feet wet. Yeah. If there's an injury, I can see him doing that way too. But I think you want to go with the vets, especially with these first few games coming up, especially. It's as much as you look at the back end of the schedule, you're like, all right, cool, that looks easier. It's playing 3 games against the NFC South. I know they weren't that great, but you look at the quarterbacks and receivers you're potentially going to see there.
It's a lot of talent.
It's a lot, and you don't want to burn a rookie's confidence early if he struggles, especially a guy like Quinyon, who you really need for long term if you want him to be replacement for Slay. But it's going to be a very tough. I don't want to be Howie Roseman in terms of
I agree.
Discussion.
It's tough.
Yeah, we didn't even mention Josh Jobe was still part of it.
Sure.
Avonte Maddox, you got to go in there.
Zach McPherson is still on the roster.
It's good.
Yeah, it's loaded. But, Chris, considering the Eagles' cornerback history, since I've been around as an Eagles fan and analyst, I'll take this problem instead of the problems they've had in years past, for sure. You got me kind of thinking about this, especially with Sidney Brown's injury early on, like talking about nickel and dime packages. A lot of times you'll see like 3 corners out there, 3 safety looks. Do you think maybe, especially early on, they'll say, what you're saying, okay, we've got Quinyon Mitchell, Darius Slay, maybe Cooper DeJean. Let's throw instead of a third safety, let's get Kelee Ringo on the field or Isaiah Rodgers. Could you see packages where Vic Fangio is saying, heck, let's get 4 corners out there against some of these loaded teams with really good receivers?
It's funny you mentioned that because I could really see it because they did use Quinyon Mitchell at quasi linebacker.
I heard that, yeah.
For it. So at first, because it popped in my mind when we talked to Vic earlier, and when he's on, it's like, I want to focus him on the outside. And all of a sudden, wait a minute, is that 30? What's 30 doing on the inside? What's going on here? So like that. So it's kind of interesting to see that thing. But I think it depends on the matchup. If you have a team that is really good has really good wide receivers, maybe you go with that extra corner. Maybe if you see a team that had really like 12 personnel heavy or a really good tight end, maybe you go with the safety in that end to give yourself a little bit more size and not get beat on the inside that far.
Yeah.
But the one thing you see is a common thread between all these guys. They're learning the versatility that they're using, playing safety, playing nickel corner, playing on the outside, using that interchangeability in order to try to get the best either 5, 6, or 7 defensive backs on that field to try to help them out.
Yeah, maybe not pigeonhole them by putting them in a box saying it's this many corners, this many safeties. Like you're just saying, get the 6 to 7 best defensive backs on the field at once. So I think that makes total sense. To switch gears here and flip sides of the field, I want to talk to you about this because, you were in the room, of course. And I think sometimes, people can take things and run with it, but there's been a little bit of drama this week about, Jalen Hurts' comments or non-comments about Nick Sirianni's involvement in the offense. And I think a lot of times, Chris, that's just Jalen Hurts being Jalen Hurts and that stoic, not give the media anything kind of nature that we've grown to know since 2020. Do you think there's anything there with him and Sirianni's relationship? Why do you think, like, when he was asked that question about Sirianni's involvement, he was, I don't want to say tight-lipped, but it almost felt like he kind of avoided the question a little bit?
Well, I just think they're diametrically. I think they're different people in terms of how they approach the game, but I also think that
feels different. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, cause you got the fiery Nick Sirianni, you got the, okay.
It's almost polar opposites, which is a unique dynamic considering they're the two most important people on this roster team,
yeah.
right?
And then when you think about the question as well, too, like what he's doing, like difference in terms of like the offense, and I think, well, you don't want to give up too much stuff in terms of what you guys are doing.
Sure.
And also let's listen to Jalen just when it comes in terms of a lot of his press conferences. Sometimes we'll see him take a swig of water to sit back. Yeah. So I think it's just one of the things where he's just trying to form his words. It happened at the worst possible time to have it. But I think it's one of those things where I don't think there's an issue going on right now where you hear Hurts is not going to listen to Sirianni, doesn't respect him. I don't think it's any of that stuff right there. I think it's just one of those things where he was just okay, took his time to do it, and wasn't Paul stuttered and just went around it too. Because when you look at it, you mentioned like when he was talking about it was different for him being in meetings. I don't know if he was trying to throw not to throw Nick under the bus. Like he's trying to think like, okay, well he's doing this and just spending this amount of time.
That's a good way to look at it. I never thought of it that way, actually. Yeah, sure.
And that's what I thought it was, because when you think about the way Nick said, he's like, yeah, he's not in the offensive meeting as much as he was with Kellen. He's been around there going to other things. So I don't know if he was trying to go, okay, I'm not going to tell him what he's doing. So it's all that stuff that was going on there. So I don't think there's an issue in terms of the two of them. And usually you'll probably hear no in terms of the, well, I want this person, or I want this person, so I want this person. So I think it's all right now.
No, that's a really good perspective. I actually didn't really think of it that way for sure, that Jalen almost was trying to not throw his coach under the bus when everybody right now is kind of taking it the other way, saying like he kind of was in a way. So that's super interesting. Do you think it's funny you mentioned like how they're so fire and ice with their approaches. Do you think that works for a head coach quarterback dynamic?
I think it can. The main thing is you guys got to communicate. It's real different. Like I think especially on the sidelines, no one ever seen that. I don't think it works in that way too. I remember this was going back a few years when Jalen told Nick, "Hey, I need you to basically yell at me," and sometimes to jolt and stuff like that for jolt things. Okay, that happens, but generally, I'm thinking like, if I'm just a calm, I know me. I'm like, if I'm just calm, like, what are you doing?
Yeah,
on this way, what's going on? Apparently, he said, Jalen said before he gave the green light. Nick's giving the green light on that one too. And
that's fair.
The main thing is they don't have to be buddy. They don't have to be going, hey, let's go to the movies. I think we should go to the movies too. But as long as they keep a line of communication, they're still talking in those meetings, that they still do anything else. That's the way you gotta go. They don't have to be best friends. And I don't think it's going there, but I don't think they're hanging out. But it's one of those things where I think there's still a mutual respect there. And that's the key.
I think that's definitely the key for sure. Chris, one more for you here. Of course, Howie Roseman is always looking to improve this roster. We've even seen that over, the last month. He continues to add talent, and we've seen that in the past years. I could go back to 2017 when he's trading for Ronald Darby right before the season, or 2022 he's trading for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Is there another move that could come? And if so, like, is there a position that we should be watching? I know you mentioned like maybe trading away one of these corners. Is there a position still that maybe heading into camp, he could be saying, okay, we need some more bodies here?
I wouldn't be if the one I was worried about, they filled it again, so they continue to fill the offensive line. Because if you lose one of those guys along their line, I think especially depends on where, because center.
Well, and that helps with Sharping, right? With that signing.
Yeah, that was the big one, because he still also plays center in that one too. You got Hennessy as depth, and you got Beckton at depth. So I think that was the big thing. Linebacker, maybe. I think you look at the linebacker depth right now. When you look at, you got Vaughn, and I think that was the key. They used a lot of these OTAs to let him go in the middle
Do you think he's going to stick there? Because he played a lot of edge, I feel like, in New Orleans.
I think he's a lot of edge. I think he's still going to be a lot of edge snaps, but I think we won't be surprised if, say, maybe you have Nolan Smith out there or you have Huff and Sweat, then you have Bond you got to worry about. Maybe you do overload one side. I think I think you'll see a more edge than you do in the middle, but it helps to get him that stuff as a backup middle linebacker potentially. But the fact that he's your backup middle linebacker, and you also got Ben Van Summer in, I was like, all right, maybe you add another body, a healthy body there. Well, I mean, Quan Alexander, that's a name. Like, there's a couple of guys that got Steelers. I think it's Quan Alexander Steelers. Like, this guy, he's coming off of Achilles, but he's a guy that I think would fit them very well. Give them some depth. Give them something, especially in the pass coverage as well, too. They want to use them in the nickel and then like a nickel middle linebacker and put them on with their corner safety. But I look at probably right now, you don't need, to my opinion, you don't need a wide receiver because you got a billion of them right now.
Sure. Yeah, you got to figure out what you've got, right?
Yeah, but that's fantastic. That or edge rusher. If they can find a way to get in like another reliable guy that gets you a high win rate, that might be a thing. But edge rusher, probably off the ball linebacker would be the two I'd look at.
Yeah, what do you think they feel about their tight end position? It's not. It kind of is surprising to me they didn't draft anybody. They didn't really bring anybody in outside of CJ Uzomah. Considering Dallas Goedert's injury history, Chris, like I know this team has moved away from 12 personnel a lot, even though most of the time in the Doug Peterson era it was more based on necessity than preference, right? With all the receiver injuries, but I think it is a little surprising, like how light they've gone behind Goddard, considering that injury history.
The one thing I know, like looking at the personnel tendencies when it comes to Kellen Moore, he loves to use a lot of 11, but he does throw some 12 in there, here and there. And it was when it came to 12, he had some of the highest uses in there with the Cowboys. Sometimes I think he used 13. Right. I was like, what the heck? But I think when you look at the way this offense is going right now, on that one too, Uzomah, the thing that had me a little bit worried is you lost your best blocking tight end in Jack Stoll.
Sure.
So now if you ever did that, if you have something more to happen, now you got to use. I think you lean more to Goddard be the blocker, but you don't want to leave him inside because then he's your best inside tight end receiving option, and he goes on that way too. I think Uzomah, I look in that way. I think he's serviceable. And I think the reason they kept Albert O around here for a while now, especially if they gave up a draft pick last year again, which got shocked. Like, okay,
yeah, and then never used him.
and said that, but they believe a lot in him. The reason they kept him too. I think it's not one of the top 3 battles on this team when it comes to that, but I think something to Bears watching when training camp starts up again is when you look at Grant Calcaterra versus Albert O. I think that's the conversation you got to look for that third, because I don't foresee with knowing if you want to keep all these offensive backs and you're heavy at other positions you want to keep things, it's going to have to be a decision, man. I don't think they keep 4 tight ends this time.
No, I don't think so either. Great stuff as always. Chris Franklin, the Eagles beat reporter for NJ.com, joining us right here on Locked On Eagles. You can follow him on X at @CFranklinNews. Chris, hopefully we can get you on too during training camp, and love your work as always, so we appreciate you coming on, man.
Appreciate it, Louis. Thanks very much for having me on.
Thanks.